spoke past your window last night.
So today it's a little rainy out, and my foot is a bit swollen anyway. So I was gonna just go around and show parts of the county out here that I detect or metal detect, or even just some unique sites. So here is this is Lunenburg Cemetery. It goes up. You can't really see it on here, but that's actually a really steep incline. I think there's about 100-foot distance out here. I haven't metal detected out here because, you know, people don't like you digging in cemeteries, but this is one of the older ones we have out here. Dates to the mid-1800s. There's several people from the Civil War that were buried out here. Lunenburg is essentially a ghost town right now. There's dozens of structures out in this area that were from the early to late 1800s, and I think actually the original tavern or saloon is around here in the cemetery. They moved it to make a shed at some point in the early 1900s. And get an idea of how steep it is out here. And kind of what the country looks like out here. This is pretty common. You can see my car, that little black dot down there. But I'm at the highest part of the cemetery right now. But nice view. And here's just another view of the cemetery. Some really beautiful headstones out here. Of course, I just walked by the area where they buried a lot of kids from polio and other diseases, the turn of the past century, from the early 1900s to about the 1920s. And you can see several nice or older stones out that way. So this is a relatively new part of the cemetery. The historical and preservation societies out here do a really good job of research, and they had found, and this kind of dates the area too, this is a pre-Civil War African American cemetery, and they think that what this was is the place that they would bury the slaves from that local farmers or plantation owners had out here. You can see they just put up new barbed wire all around the cemetery. But so this is the pre-Civil War slavery cemetery, and they're not exactly sure how far out it goes. These are just areas that they were able to identify where bodies were buried, and research of that these were in fact pre-Civil War slaves. But you can see, and there's a lot of land out here, and we're not exactly sure if there's more, if the cemetery extends out at all. So, but this is kind of an indicator of the size of Lunenburg, the history of Lunenburg. And there's actually stories out here. One of them I heard about 20 years ago when I was in my late teens. There was an older guy. I had come out here to explore and bumped into an older guy, and he told me that his grandfather, who served in the Civil War, had told a story about a local, when fighting skirmishes and stuff, and I'll show you one of those areas, started out here. There was someone who buried a a jar of coins that they had somewhere in Lunenburg Cemetery, and as far as I know, or anyone I've talked to knows, it's never been found. But of course, like I mentioned earlier, you don't exactly metal detect cemeteries out here. I don't know if you do anywhere, but people don't like you digging around tombstones or anything.
I ride my bike, I roller skate, don't drive no car.
Just want to show, this is one of the older places out here. Now I think they're just actually using it as a shop or a shed for their house. And this is where the Lunenburg Post Office used to be located. And in a little bit you'll see another old home back there. So again, that was another house that was part of the original Lunenburg. Come out here, there's another structure right there. I don't know if that was a old shed, but that's actually big enough to have been used as something like a saloon. I know one saloon I came across, it was just a little bit bigger than that. This is kind of a cool area here, and I've been out here a few times metal detecting, and I found a 1919 wheat penny and just some random stuff like a spoon tip and what else did I find? I think a ball jar lid and stuff like that. But this is actually the original Lunenburg schoolhouse, or what remains of it. I think it finally collapsed about 10 or more years ago. But this is what's left of it. It was originally a 2-story schoolhouse. I think it was one room on the bottom floor, and then you had the upper room, which I think is where the teachers stayed, or teachers. I used it as the base for the schoolhouse in my book, The Treasure at Devil's Hole. So if I can, I'll put a picture in the video. So this was the original schoolhouse structure right here. It was built shortly after the Civil War, and then it continued until the early 1900s when they built the larger schoolhouse, I think in the 1930s, and that was the Lunenburg schoolhouse. And that eventually became, everyone merged into Melbourne elementary schools, I think by the 60s, and now it's used as the community center. But like I said, I've been out here detecting a few times, and actually haven't come up with too much surprising for an area that was used for 150 years by kids. But from what I understand, this has been a very well detected area. So one other thing out here that's really interesting, so they have a marker up here for the skirmish at Lunenburg, and it was a small skirmish between opposing forces. I think the Southerners were already camped out here, so the Confederates were camped out. I don't know if you can see, but there's a field back here, and Confederates were camped out up high. The Union in Batesville found out that they were out here and sent a patrol of 40 or 60 men. It ultimately led, and 4 Confederates were seriously injured and 2 were captured. One of those that were injured ended up dying the following day. Then the North lost one. But historians use this a lot because it shows how the Civil War was really fought, where on both sides, the North and the South, all the men fighting were from Izard County. So, and during voting, this county actually voted to stay with the Union, but Arkansas as a whole seceded, so they did as well. So you had a very rural community both sides fighting against each other. From what I understand, a lot of the soldiers, when they were fighting, were aiming high or aiming to the ground, so it looked like they were shooting at the enemy, but actually they were trying to shoot away so that they didn't hurt anyone. And anyway, this was a skirmish area, and the field back there, they do a reenactment every year, and I might, that's one area that I want to get a permission to, so I haven't quite gotten it yet, but I'd love to get over there. So you have a better idea of where that skirmish took place. The hill straight out there is where the Confederates were, and I believe, and this field is where they came up through. Actually, there's a small structure, I don't know if you can see it on here, out that way that's from that time period. So I just had a cool experience. So you can see a house back here, and this is right across the street from the area that I said was the old post office for Lunenburg. I was driving by where the post office was in that old house, and the owner of the building happened to be there, so I got out and asked her if I could detect, and she said she was cool with that, and then pointed to this, which I never even saw. So that was neat. So I got permission to metal detect where the old post office is, and there's an old house there too, so that's pretty sweet. See it, but there's another old structure. It dates back to the original Lunenburg, so I might try and get a permission out there sometime. I know right now they're just using it for storage, so but yeah, like I said, dozens of these exist out here, and just in this small area, all of them are abandoned, so there's a lot of history out here.
I got a brand new pair of roller skates. You got a brand new key. I think that we should get together and try them out, you see.
Okay, so this is really an interesting thing for me. When I was maybe 13 or 14, I was reading the Lost Treasure Atlas, which I forgot who wrote it, but they put together an atlas of all reported treasures and ghost towns and, you know, settlements, forts, things like that, into a series of books. Well, in Arkansas, there's around Izard County a town called Pineville that really tiny, and is rumored to have had a treasure of Spanish gold buried there. The story, as I understand it, is there was a treasure galleon that got caught either in a hurricane or the captain just decided to take off, and he went up the Mississippi River along Arkansas, and then took the rivers into the White River and came out this way, and his crew ended up coming on land and going across northern Arkansas, where the natives attacked and killed everyone. Story goes that one of the 14-year-old on board escaped and got back to Spain somehow. Anyway, they buried the valuables of that ship in a cavern in Pineville, and then destroyed the entrance, so no one knew where it was. And if you've ever been to Pineville or anywhere around this area, you can understand why. And in another video, I'll show you where some of the caves are that I know of. But this place is just honeycombed with caves. Anyway, a couple of years after that, I was at my grandma's house, and she's from this area, and she would tell us ghost stories and things like that. Well, she ended up telling me about a farmer out here, and this is Drip Spring Road. Well, she told me about a farmer on Drip Spring Road who had a spring, and anytime they had a lot of rain, which this time of the year is usually torrential downpours, he would have a barrel under that spring, And if the spring got high enough, occasionally he would find gold Spanish coins in his barrel that came out of that spring. And the funny thing is that she knew nothing about that story of Pineville, and very few people actually do know the story. But there is a story about this farmer who she knew from the 50s and 60s that he would occasionally find Spanish gold coins that came out of his spring. And he's not the only one around here. I've talked to other people, and they've said that, yeah, their grandparents or great-grandparents would talk about Spanish gold coins that would come out, that they'd find in the springs, or when they'd have to go clean out the springs every year, they'd find Spanish, one or two Spanish gold coins. So that's a really good indicator that that treasure perhaps is real, that it got caught into an underground river and was spread, throughout the area here. So it's just really interesting part of the county.
I ride my bike, I roller skate, don't drive no car. Don't go too fast, but I go pretty far.
So this house is one I've wanted to detect for a really long time. It's on the way to Pineville, and you can see the house here and the little barn back there. The other day I thought, I drive by here all the time, and I'm always purposefully looking for the owner, because there's a cattle ranch over this way. And the other day I was coming out here and I saw them loading up cattle, so I stopped by, talked to the rancher, asked if I could detect over here, and he said he doesn't own it. He said the owner sold him everything that was out here except for this small plot with the house. So I know the house dates back to the early 1900s, perhaps the 1800s. I did talk to a woman who used to live here when she was a child, and her father was either a police officer or on the sheriff's department, but he was killed in the line of duty, and that led to the largest manhunt that Arkansas had, and that may still stand today. But I had talked to her years ago, and she would talk about living in this house, and she actually told me about another house that I'm gonna stop by in a little bit, where a friend of hers lived there. So next I'm actually gonna go to Flat Rock Cemetery, which is about a quarter of a mile behind this house, and there's a little road back this way that goes there. So this is Flat Rock Cemetery and Church. This is the church, obviously. It's no longer in use. The doors are all locked, and you can peek inside and see that it's not used anymore, but it's a very cool looking church. I'm going to try and step back a ways. You can see the full structure. So that's Flat Rock Church, and you can see the cemetery in back here. The church was erected in 1873, and land was later donated to the city. I believe it might be in Calico Rock, but several of the tombstones date to around Civil War to modern times. They still bury people out here. I have detected around the schoolhouse, but I didn't spend much time out. I didn't find very much. I imagine if there's anything big, it's probably in the cemetery. Let's see. A couple stone structures. This is the older part of the cemetery right here. But I would like to come out here and detect this area. I think they have been doing picnics and church gatherings and stuff out here for a really long time, so I'd like to get out in that area. Just had like a minor heart attack out here. So this is a place in Pineville that I come by all the time, and probably my favorite house out here. It's just gorgeous. I'm trying to, every time I drive by, I try to see if the owner is out here. But today I was driving, I saw a truck parked out to the side, so I pulled up, knocked on the door. About 5 seconds later, I heard like 3 shotgun blasts, really, really close, like within 50 feet, and I just nearly jumped out of my shorts. And looked over to the side, and these 2 teenagers came walking by and asked if they lived here, and they said no, but they had permission to hunt on the land and knew the guy had some targets out here, so they were out here shooting. But oh man, my heart is still trying to steady my heart. Anyway, trying to get permission to hunt here. I talked to a woman who grew up in this house also, and it was her grandparents' house, and she grew up here, I think she said in the from 30s, 20s, and she thought the house was built just before 1910. But anyway, it's a beautiful old plantation style house. I would love to get out here and detect, so still trying to keep my eyes open.
Sometimes I think that you're avoiding me. I'm okay alone, but you got something I need.
Trimble Campground Church Cemetery. The Trimble family were the first to settle in this part of the of the state, and it's I think of the early 1800s. And the reason it's called campground is there were a lot of there was a large open area near the church where they would have campgrounds, mostly religious based. I forget what they call them, but on the weekends families would come down and they would camp there. And here's the rest of the cemetery. They would camp there over the weekend, kind of a salvation type of thing. And there were springs and a pond that people could be baptized in. And right now I'm trying to see if there's original tombstones over here, or if the cemetery came after the Trimbles were buried. But it looks like this is a very old area right here with these stones, a lot of them unmarked, just essentially place markers, which is really common out here. So anyway, this is the Trimble Campground Cemetery. My interest is more with the campground itself and trying to find that, which if you look back there beyond the cemetery, there's a large open area that doesn't look like it's used for farming, so it might actually be a campground, and for all I know they might still go there, but it's been in use since before the Civil War as a campground. A lot of the local families would come out there. So it's yeah, just interesting. So anyway, Trimble Campground Church Cemetery. Before I get on up to where I wanted to go in Calico Rock, when you come into Calico, you find this log cabin, and it's one of the few remaining pre-Civil War log cabins that are still standing. Now this cabin actually was where near the Trimble campground Cemetery was that I was just at. In 2009, they took it apart log by log and brought it here. And, you know, they have a couple displays around here of the history of it, but the family was here in 1815, a little further up along the river, along the White River and the bluffs, and then they built this cabin in 1853, like I said, up by the cemetery, and then brought it over here. The church maintains it now, and you can go inside and they'll give little tours and stuff to kids, and I've never been inside. This is actually, I've passed it a ton of times, but this is the first time I've ever done anything. But you can see they have a little bed in there, and it's like an ironing board and the famous mid-18th century wetback. But anyway, it's a really cool piece of history. And okay, so now I am going to head over to downtown Calico. I'm just gonna drive through old Calico Rock here because I want to get to the ghost town part. But you can see Calico Rock is a pretty old town, very historic. See up in here, it's right on, this bridge goes across the White River. And then you see the railroad here. So where I'm heading is a place called Pepper Sauce. And Pepper Sauce is what is an old ghost town. No one lives there anymore, but it's interesting because a lot of buildings still exist there. It's called also East Calico, but Pepper Sauce is the ghost town name. And this is the bridge that crosses from West Calico into East Calico, and you can see kind of a rickety bridge, but you can see across there that's the railroad bridge right there. On the left here, that's the original jail. So that's the jail right there. And then on the right is, you know, one of the buildings. So anyway, Pepper Sauce is really interesting because it was kind of a traditional Old West ghost town. It was really volatile. There were a lot of fights and a lot of outlaws that lived out here. There was prostitution, gambling, pretty much everything you'd picture of an Old West town was out this way. Was in Pepper Sauce, and it was named Pepper Sauce because that's what they called moonshine back then, which was pretty prevalent here. Well, so they had, Calico Rock had a stagecoach stop, they had the ferry and the railroad, and when the railroad started making their stop here and the ferry route was making its stop here, the locals decided that they'd kind of had enough of the people who were patronizing Pepper Sauce, so they essentially ran them all out of town. And you can see there's some work that's being done here. This is all privately owned out here, but it's definitely a ghost town. So anyway, the people who lived in Calico Rock ran everyone out of town, and these are the remaining buildings. Several of them still are around, but you know, of course, several are gone. These are probably new structures except for that stone one, and all of these are accessible, and they have historic signs out front telling what was going on there. I just wanted to drive through it, so This is a potential area to metal detect. I just have to get permission. But I think it would be a fun area to get to. Definitely historic. So yeah, this is Pepper Sauce, and one of the great reasons to come visit around Calico Rock here.